mystery about why women seem to be attracted to these so-called dark triad traits. A harmless man is not a good man. A good man is a very, very dangerous man. Whose moral has the capability for violence and the capability for aggression built.
So, you're being selected by natural forces as a consequence of your behavior.
But I don't. I hate you.
He's a nice guy and he's the friend, and you know, the woman tells him everything, but she doesn't like him a bit.
Beauty isn't, she's interested in the guy who's the beast. And that's exactly right.
It scared me. But you scared me more.
The selection mechanisms that determine what happens to you in relationship to the next generation, say, are selecting you on the basis of your action and your behavior, I would say. They're selecting you on the basis of your values. So, because, you know, if you're an idiot, say, and you go charging after a lion and the lion eats you, then the nature of reality, so to speak, has rendered a judgment on the value structure that sent you down that particular path, right? And so, you're being selected by natural forces as a consequence of your behavior. Now, and then we can extend that argument, especially in the human case, or in the case of any organism that's also subject to sexual selection. And human beings are tremendously subject to sexual selection. Now, Darwin was a great believer in sexual selection. You know, he thought it was at least as important as the selection of the organism by the natural environment, whatever that is. But, you know, biologists really had a hard time with that, and they kind of ignored sexual selection for like 100 years, which is quite interesting. I think it was partly because sexual selection implies, especially when you're dealing with organisms that are sort of conscious like human beings, that choice itself is a determinant of evolutionary processes. And you know, the strict deterministic materialists didn't really like that, and they couldn't really come up with an argument against it, but they sort of shelved the whole topic for a very long period of time. But one of the things we know, for example, about human beings is that females are very sexually selective. Female humans, as opposed to, say, to female chimps, which aren't. So part of what's occurred to select human beings for the way they are is the choices that each gender has made with regards to action and belief, but in many ways, more specifically, female choices. So it's kind of interesting. The next time you're irritated at your boyfriend, let's say, then you can just remember that, you know, untold millions of women have chosen men so that they're exactly like he is. And so, you know, you can't really blame him for that.
Here's another thing that could be pitted in that competition. So imagine you had men who could confer benefit and who were incapable of inflicting cost, and men who could confer benefit but were capable of inflicting cost. I think you'd see winners on that side because of that free rider problem. And that ties into what we'll discuss in relationship to the dark triad, because there's some mystery about why women seem to be attracted to these so-called dark triad traits. And I would say that they're using them as insufficient markers for the ability to or the acquisition of status. So, and narcissists capitalize on that, right? Because a narcissist looks confident, and lots of confident people are competent, but some confident people aren't competent, but they can fool you.
Yes.
And then I think the other explanation is that if you had to choose between a benefit conferrer who could punish free riders and one who couldn't, you should pick the former, who could deal with free riders, who could and would, had the capability to. And so,
you know, if you watch movies, there's always this beta male guy, if they're romantic movies, and he's a nice guy and he's the friend, and you know, the woman tells him everything, but she doesn't like him a bit. She likes the guy who's like got an edge and who's capable of, I would say, mayhem, but at least of aggression. Now, that doesn't mean she wants him to be aggressive, but what it does mean is that she wants him to be able to be aggressive. That would be good. And so he's the romantic target, and so he's the person that's incorporated the shadow, and he's someone that is respectable and perhaps useful.
You see this sort of thing. I really like the Disney movie Beauty and the Beast. I think they got it right. And so there's Gaston in that movie, and he's a narcissist, but he has physical prowess. Like, he can't understand why he's not the guy, but he's narcissistic. And then there's the Beast, who's a beast, but he's tameable. And so he can be a benefit conferrer, and he has the capacity to inflict cost. So one of the things one of the big 5 personality traits that the dark triad is most associated with is agreeableness, low agreeableness. And I do think that research psychologists and psychologists in general have a kind of ethical bias in relationship to the agreeableness dimension, you know, and of course women are higher in trait agreeableness than men. Reliably, it's about half a standard deviation. It's one of the biggest sex differences, and it's associated with compassion and politeness in the work we've done anyways. And so that's empathy, at least to some degree. Now the question is, what is the ethical utility of lower agreeableness, right? Because you'd think, well, it would interfere possibly with sharing, right? Because if you're more compassionate, more empathic, you're going to feel the hunger of other people and you'd be more motivated to care for them, let's say. But it's also possible that low agreeableness has something to do with, well, perhaps hunting prowess. That might be part of it, but it also might be part of the solution to the free rider problem. And so women are in a conundrum with agreeableness, right? Because they need a mate who's agreeable enough so they can bond with them and that will care for their children and that cares in general. But they need someone who's disagreeable enough so that they're capable, let's say, of dealing with free riders. I wonder if they confuse that with trait openness, right? Because the open types are going to experiment. They're going to try lots of different things. And that daredevil, you know, I don't care, might be not easily distinguished from the capacity to engage in creative problem-solving pursuits, you know, and perhaps with courage as well. Right, and you could see that that's a real tight line to walk down, you know, and part of what constrains agreeableness, let's say from a temperamental perspective, so if you're low in agreeableness, let's say, well, you're less empathic, you're more competitive, you're rougher, blunter, tougher, you know, what would you say, at least with regards to the compassion you show to others. And so what helps modulate that? Well, some of that would be conscientiousness. And so in the dark triad types, you see low conscientiousness as well. You know, really low agreeable, high conscientious types are quite interesting because you can trust them because they'll do their duty, but they're very blunt and direct and harsh. And that can be helpful as well because they'll tell you unpleasant truths even if they hurt your feelings. So there's some utility in that. So you can imagine that agreeableness can be modified, let's say, by conscientiousness, so that takes the psychopathy edge off it, because low agreeableness and low conscientiousness, that's a rough combination. And so women are attracted to some degree to the lower agreeable types, and I think that accounts for the bad boy paradox that you described, at least in part. And maybe it takes further experience and wisdom on the part of judicious women to see where they can get the disagreeableness that's necessary, but it has to be hemmed in by something like, well, conscientiousness.
Right. On the other end of the distribution, the antagonistic end, well, if you're antagonistic enough, you end up in prison. It's the best personality predictor of antisocial behavior and seems to be associated with sort of cold-blooded aggression rather than the reactive form, which would be more characteristic of negative emotion, neuroticism. So, and I think that people who are lower in agreeableness or higher antagonism are probably predatory. Now, you know, human beings are predators, and we have been for a huge swath of our evolutionary history, maybe for all of it, you know, maybe not when we were one-celled animals, but for a huge chunk of it. And during that time, our capacity to be predators has definitely been key to our survival.
I don't believe that women do have a tendency to prefer bad men higher in dark triad traits. They may have a tendency to be more erotically attracted to men who are capable of manifesting dominance and aggression. I think the evidence for that is relatively clear. And one of the best ways of characterizing like a higher order morality, and this is something that Nietzsche talked about a fair bit, is that, and Jung as well, with regards to the idea of integration of the shadow, is that someone who's moral has the capability for violence and the capability for aggression built in and at hand, but is also someone who's perfectly capable of controlling that in a civilized manner. And I think that, you know, I'm speaking off the cuff here, obviously, but I think that attraction that some women have for the sort of men who are more likely to misbehave, to act in a delinquent manner and so forth, is partly their desire to be associated with men who have the capacity for aggression. A harmless man is not a good man. A good man is a very, very dangerous man who has that under voluntary control. And you know, you also see that, like one of the central female stories, let's say, if the hero archetype is the central male story, there are variants of hero archetypes that are relevant to women, and one of them is Beauty and the Beast. And you know, Beauty isn't interested in the guy who isn't the beast. She's interested in the guy who's the beast, and that's exactly right, but she's interested in the guy who's the beast that can be civilized and disciplined. right, and who can use that in the service, well, let's say, of a family. So basically what happened was that a innocent, well-meaning, and attractive young woman encounters a male who's a bit of a monster. And the monster, there's 5 types of classic male monster. For all you males who want to know, this is what you can become. Vampire, that's a good one. Werewolf, billionaire, pirate, and surgeon. Okay, so that's very interesting because so there's predatory dominance that's implicit in that, right? With the billionaire, it's more abstract, but clearly that's an indication of very high success in the male dominance hierarchy. So, but there's this desire for aggression that's in that, a real aggression, right? And it's not surprising to me at all. It makes perfect sense. But the basic plot is that the woman encounters this mysterious and aggressive male and tames him. That's the female hero myth as far as I can tell. It's Beauty and the Beast. And so it's because, well, there's no fun in taming someone who's already tame. And what makes you think you really want someone who's tame anyways? There's no interest in that. Plus, when chaos manifests itself, what makes you think that someone tame is going to be good for anything? And it's a real question, and so that aggression is absolutely vital, it's absolutely necessary. But because it's incredibly dangerous, which of course it is, it has to be civilized. And so what happens is that the archetypal female in these pornographic romances seduces and tames the aggressive male. And that's her encounter with chaos. Now it's more complicated. Of course, females, they're more complicated, and that's exactly how it is, and it's no wonder because their lives are more complicated.